taboos. So, this is a very interesting topic. Some of the words I'm going to present on the PowerPoint slide are very triggering, and so I'm going to give you a little bit of a warning that we're going to discuss some very heavy terms. Sometimes we'll discuss some epithets, some racial epithets, or sexual orientation epithets. And so, in this lecture, feel free to pause. Feel free to, skip over some parts if you need to. But let's go ahead and get started. So when we talk about in this lecture, what are some different ways of speaking? We've been talking about language variation. We've been talking about the different parts that make your identity. But also in the specific moment, there are some types of words and types of languages and types of speech styles that you can't use, or that you use with a particular set of people. So this is what we would say is a speech style or a language register, and it specifically refers to the varieties of language that are specific to the particular situation. So, for example, a lot of people have, formal or informal speech style. So, you could say to your friend, "Are you going to take MOL 191?" Or if it's a very close friend, you could say, "Gonna take MOL 191." Very informal ways of speaking. And we do this pretty much in everyday life. We're able to code switch in between different, or register switch in between different styles depending on who we talk to about the subject material in the particular situation. We all have control over our different styles. But in other languages, they may have more elaborate speech styles. So, for example, in Korean, there's different set of honorifics that you would use. Same thing for Thai. All of these words mean to eat, but they mean different things in different situations, whether you're saying it in a very informal way or a very formal way, and also who you're addressing. So, throughout the PowerPoints, I referred to slang a lot, and so, slang can be another word for a vernacular term. A lot of people use slang to refer to dialects. But in the linguistic sense, slang is just non-standard vocabulary, right? It's particular to a certain community, a certain group of people. They could be from a different region or a social group. And really, they use it to mark their social identity. If you recall from, a couple PowerPoints ago when I talked about the Chavs, right? So they use their particular types of language or slang or dialect to index the fact that, they belong to this kind of working class identity. And so, slang is subject to change. You could have words like spaced out, right on, hang up, rip off, right? So some of these words continue to linger on, but then some of them die out. So you can have new words such as barf, flub, pooped. I love that pooped is on the slide. But anyway, so these are new constructions, okay? And each year when we have new things, like the first PowerPoint when I talked about the new words that entered our lexicon, that could be considered some sort of type of slang. Shortened words. So over time, words become shortened. So, to diss someone or to narc on somebody or, a fan. This is, just a natural part of language change over time. We stop using the longer terms and we start using the shortened or clipped versions of a word. So sometimes old words can give new meaning. So, for example, grass, pot, pig, wrap, stone, slit. These could obviously have older connotations, but they have new meanings because people use them as a euphemism for other things, and we'll talk about what a euphemism is a little bit later on. Over time, slang can even become the standard. So, for example, TV. Back in the day, you would refer to someone as you refer to watching television, right? And if you said watching TV, people would say, "Oh, that's really improper," right? But now it's okay to say TV. It's okay to say fan, phone, right? A mob, even. So some of these words, over time, they kind of lose their sense of notoriety. So, for example, in the past, if you said, "Oh, that's cool," right? That would have been considered very non-standard, right? Oh, that's cool. It's the same thing as someone saying groovy. But now I think it's just a very mild term, right? People don't really think of that's cool as being, kind of slang or what the cool kids say nowadays. So, contrast this with, jargon. So, jargon would be, it is very similar to slang in that it's particularly used within the group community, but it's more related to a particular science, profession, trade, or occupation. So, you have to be within the realms of a certain type of community in order to understand, and it's kind of only used within certain professional settings. So, for example, if I were to, name all the linguistic jargon that you probably heard throughout the course of these PowerPoints, you would hear things like phoneme or morpheme or case or lexicon or phrase structure rule, But these are just fancy ways of saying, phoneme is just like a syllable. Morpheme is just like, meaning of word or like a word meaning or parts of a word, parts of speech. So, these contrast with some of the layman terms. Lexicon just means it's a fancy word for word. And then we have some of the computer jargon, and you'll notice that a lot of them have acronyms. So modem comes from modulator, demodulator. Bit comes from binary, digit. ROM from read only memory. TAM from I mean RAM, but RAM from random access memory. More from male or female. So it takes a lot of effort to be able to say these words in their entirety, and so that's why we have kind of a simplification over time. So let's also talk about the types of denotations or connotations that words have. So a denotation is exactly what the word refers to, right? So if I were to say pot, right, that is, it could be a vehicle. It could be a vessel in which you hold some sort of liquid, right, a pot. But the connotation could be different. The connotation could be different from what the effect of the word that it conjures up, right? So, you could use different terms to mean the same thing. So, in the news, you'll see the ways in which people, news media outlets, will use different phrases to refer to practically the same thing. So, for example, would they call someone a terrorist or would they call them a freedom fighter? Is someone aggressive or are they pushy? Are they closed mouth or are they secretive? Are they a ballsy women's libber or are they a courageous women's advocate, right? So it depends on how you use it. And then also, connotations have kind of a positive or a negative, they're assigned to these positive or negative values, right? And so, for example, a terrorist obviously is a very negative value, but freedom fighter kind of carries a positive connotation. So, we're going to focus some bulk of our discussion today on words that are taboo. Okay, so taboo means that they are forbidden, forbidden in society for whatever reason. So the reasons could differ from moral principle. Because you don't want to offend people, they're not used in polite company. So this word came from a Tongan word actually, and so Captain James Cook, he used the word taboo to mean a very, something that was forbidden. So this is, if the Tongans didn't like something, it was forbidden. So they said, oh no, that's taboo. And so Captain James Cook kind of took this to mean any word that is forbidden in society. So the interesting thing about taboo words is that it really depends on what language you speak, right? And how acculturated you are within the society. Um, because if you're able to say, certain languages, certain swear words in other languages, it doesn't mean as much to you as it would if you were a native speaker of that language. And so they did these kind of studies in which they looked at other individuals, and they asked other individuals to curse in a language that they weren't familiar with, and they didn't really have that kind of sense of relief when you're cursing in um, your native language, right? And so, cursing in your native language is considered to be, you really feel the emotion of these words, whereas if you were to use it in a foreign language, it doesn't really mean as much. And maybe you can try this out. Maybe if you could look up a foreign language, and then look up, how to say a swear word in that language, and use it, right? Because it doesn't really have a sense of connection. You don't have a sense of connection to that word or to that culture. It doesn't really mean anything to you. So you kind of take the power away from these words. So, in society, taboo was considered to be behaviors that were harmful. Like I said, these could be for immoral or improper reasons. They're violating a societal code or a moral code. It could be for supernatural reasons. So, for example, for a lot of religious reasons. So, we'll look at some English words that are taboo, and why they're considered taboo. But consider the ways in which, we've been talking about the different languages that people use, but think about what is not said in the language, okay? So, what is not said, and also words or expressions that are not used, and why? What does that reflect about the culture, and what does that say about the society in which this taboo word is used? So, how can a language be clean or filthy? Words are pragmatically powerful or powerless depending on how you use them. So the context is very important, right? You can take a word like prick. I pricked my finger when sewing. Okay, so that's a very clean sentence, right? No one will get mad at you. But if you said, my professor's being a prick, right? That is considered to be dirty. Okay, why? Because you're probably referring to a very phallic euphemism when you're referring to your professor, and you're not doing that when you are pricking your finger or accidentally stabbing yourself with in your finger. So, in practice, these taboo words are inhibitions or restrictions on some of the words that you use. And the reason why we give them so much power is because societally they hold a lot of weight. So, for example, if you don't follow the rules to these taboo words, they could lead to punishment. They could lead to shame. You could be shamed by your society. People don't want to listen to you. And so, for example, consider the case of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, although I currently disavow J.K. Rowling. But, the use of Voldemort, so in the series, instead of saying the word Voldemort, people would say, you know who, right? Or he who must not be named. And so this gives a lot of power to the word itself, because one of the characters, Dumbledore, said, use a word, say his name, because if you don't, you're kind of embodying this fear around this name, and so there's lots of societal punishments that happen when you use it. So these taboo words also are a reflection of, how the society values, what the society values, and also their belief system. Are they a highly religious, culture or society? Then you'll kind of see that in the words that are reflected. So some of the taboo topics that you're able to see in pretty much every language are topics related to sex or death, bodily functions like secretion, uh, religious matters, right? So these are the topics that no one really wants to talk about. Um, they're not permitted in certain contexts. They become violent on TV. It promotes violent shock or disgust. So, this is people take these words very seriously. Um, but, the important thing is it's a little bit irrational because honestly, it's not the word that is taboo. It is a word that is taboo. It's not the concept or the idea, right, that it denotes. So that's what makes it taboo. It's the word itself. So people can still think about the topic, and that's okay, but you're not allowed to say these words. So taboo also relates to the forbidden acts, that are occurring within society, or they could have a religious connotation. So, for example, if you say Jesus Christ during a prayer, that's considered to be okay because that's a very religious context. But if you say Jesus Christ when you stub your toe or you're yelling at it, someone, then it's they would consider it taboo to take the Lord's name in vain. And so, some of the curses that people have, they'll try to modify the curses a little bit. So instead of hell, you'll have heck, or instead of damn, you'll have darn. But there's still a lot of linguistic taboos. Although some over time, some of the severity of the word itself will lessen. So, for example, if you read a lot of Shakespeare, you'll notice that a lot of his characters curse. So they'll say zounds, and zounds means God's wounds, right? And so back in the day, you would never say that unless you were lower class or unless you were so angry, right? Because I was just like invoking God's wrath. But now no one really ever says zounds, right? So being able to say that doesn't have any sort of emotional connotation. But if you violate these taboos, you're drawing attention to yourself, you're showing contempt. It shows that you are aggressive, provocative, you're mocking authority, you're, expressing freedom. So, what counts as taboo differs from person to person or group to group. It definitely represents the power relations, right? So, a lot of younger children wouldn't be able to use these words, but if you're a little bit older, and that's okay. What's tabooed in one conversation is fine in another. So if you're very ramped up about something, right? And you just say, "Oh shit," right? And that shows a lot of if you're a politician, for example, and you're able to curse in front of your people, your followers might love it because they'll say, "Oh my gosh, you're so authentic. You curse just like the rest of us," right? But if you have your antagonists or your haters will probably say no. They'll probably say, this person just lost it. They lost their cool, or they're blasphemous. They're using these, religious swear words, right? So it depends on what conversation, depends on what is established, what's fine between two people. So I wouldn't curse in front of my boss, for example, because there's a different power relation there, and cursing is considered to be very very informal. So in other cultures, because you have a kind of sense of a lack uh, of the severity of a word when you curse in another culture, some of the languages will actually borrow um, what are the terms for sex organs or terms for bodily functions in other languages because they're able to use it as a euphemism. So this is why we have a lot of, oh, pardon my French, or excuse me for my French, right? That's not necessarily because we have our curse words from France. Like we don't have a lot of French curse words. Like no one's going around saying like, oh my God, like mon Dieu or anything like that. It's mostly has to do with the intense rivalry, the long historical rivalry between England and France. And so, they're able to say, oh, pardon my French, right? And they will, when they're discussing a curse word. So we're not actually borrowing from the French per se, but we're able to borrow from other roots of the words to denote or connote that we're using euphemism. So, for example, on the left, I have a lot of words here that are historically Anglo-Saxon, right? So, Anglo-Saxons were the people that came, they're Germanic people, and they came in and to rule Scotland and Wales, and they changed a lot of the English language, and so a lot of these rules have their Anglo-Saxon roots. But the Latin derived roots, are okay. So you can say, these Latin words because they're more scientifically based, right? But if you look at the language, they actually have these Latin roots, and so a lot of people will kind of revere this Latin, even though you're referring to the same object. So, despite the rapid change in taboo words, some language taboos still exist. So, sometimes phonetically the taboo words fall out of use. So, for example, a rooster was used to refer to as a cock. Now that our language has changed to where, one is more associated with the phallic meaning. And so now we kind of say rooster as a form for a bird that roosts, right? And so, we're able to refer to different things based on what they connote. So, the use of emojis, right? Instead of using, some of these euphemisms or swear words, we're able to use emojis now. So that's another way in which emojis are used as a paralinguistic marker to kind of enhance the speech because, we're using pictures to relay our true meaning. And so these euphemisms are often used to avoid these taboo words. We're talking about it in a very roundabout way, because we can't actively talk about these taboo words. We have to use other forms. So, these words are, that are phonetically similar disappear, like I mentioned with the rooster. But also in bilingual situations. So, for example, if you were able to say, "Hey, motherfucker," that doesn't really mean anything, right? In English, uh, or in Spanish, but in English, it is similar to a curse word, and so a lot of people derive humor from this kind of bilingual example. And there's other ways too in which you probably learn how to say this in another language, and people will think it's funny because it sounds like a curse word. So, when we use euphemisms, we're using them in a very specific ways. So, we don't really like to talk about death. We don't like to talk about urination or defecation or having intercourse. These are topics that are considered to be, secretive in a very Western way, right? Other cultures might be very different. So, we have words to express them because we're kind of, shy about saying them, or they bring on shame or discomfort or anxiety. So, for example, to die, we'll say someone passes away or kicks the bucket. If someone were to urinate or defecate, they'll say, "I need to go number one" or number two. And instead of intercourse, we have a lot of euphemisms for intercourse. So you could say, "Then we made love," or "the train entered the tunnel," or things like that. So, um, lots of different euphemisms. I'm reminded now of the movie North by Northwest, where it's an old movie starring Cary Grant, but at the very end scene, they have a train entering a tunnel. It's supposed to be very, euphemistic, because back in the day they couldn't show sex scenes, quite like they do nowadays. So euphemisms allow us to talk about unpleasant things. It also kind of neutralizes the unpleasantness because we don't want to talk about death, right? Our culture doesn't really want to talk about dying. We don't want to talk about aging, and so we have these words as a kind of leniency, a bridge for the topics that we don't want to talk about. It kind of gives these unpleasant tasks and makes them a little bit more attractive, or if not attractive, a little bit less repulsive. So the euphemism highlights that words don't just have a denotative meaning, but they also have a connotative meaning, and that children automatically learn which words are taboo based on their family or social group. Again, it could be cultural, right? If you go to Australia, there's lots of different ways they'll say cunt a lot, and that word is very, very offensive in the United States, right? But that word is, to denote, a person who is a close friend, right? So, it could be very different, very cultural, depending on if you grew up in a family, if you grew up in a social group, if you grew up in a different country, the kinds of word usages that you use. So, just to give you an example, some words were taboo in America, but not in England. So, for example, people wouldn't like to use the word women, right? Had different connotations back in the day. So, you don't say, hi woman, you would say hi lady, right? Or, Mrs. Or, you're kind of using a different word. And that could have changed as well. How many times you use the word woman in a positive or negative way. Bloody, this is considered to be, very lower class, right? So it kind of fell out of favor in America. So people don't really say, um, pass the bloody marker or something like that. So this is considered to be very, very, very taboo. So much so that they edited it in the newspapers back in the day. So referring now to epithets. So these are, you've heard these before. These are disparaging. These are abusing words, right? So they could be racial, using the N word, for example. This could be a mark on sexual or gender. So, for example, a lot of people would say someone's a bitch or someone's a dick, right? So these are very, meant to hurt somebody. Religion, disability. There's lots of different taboos, and of course they change over time as well. Um, so a lot of people would use, a word to symbolize that someone is mentally deficient, um, and they would use that word, to describe their friends or jokingly or whatever. And over time, you just kind of learn that that's not okay to say. And so, some of the social waves of using these words kind of fall out of favor, right? But it's very interesting to see the ways in which we give these words power, or we take the power away, because it really perpetuates the stereotypes that separates people or represents discrimination, right? You can have an argument with somebody and they say one racial epithet to you, and that's disparaging, and you don't really have a similar kind of comeback to them, right? And so this is something to where it's very steeped in our history of discrimination in this country. And also these words can have anger meanings. So, for example, if you're a woman and you say, "All right, bitches, let's get in the car," this is something to where you are highlighting your camaraderie, your togetherness, right? And you feel very close to the people that you are calling this epithet. And so this is kind of a way of people reclaiming the types of, power structures that are inherent in these words. And they say, this was used as a term to denigrate me and my identity. I am now using that term to refer to other people within my social group or within my identity. But this is very controversial, because not everyone will agree with you, and not everyone with the same identity will agree. For example, not everyone agrees with using the N word. Not everyone agrees with using, bitch if you're a female, right? So it differs from society and from culture and even from individuals. So, what do these taboo words teach us? They teach us about the dialect differences, the deficits or deficiencies in our, oh, sorry, the dialect differences do not represent the deficiencies in our thinking. They actually command a wide range of language varieties and allows us to function in a variety of settings. But our use of language is also, as you explored in previous lectures, our regional origins, social class, educational levels, values and beliefs, and also the clarity of our own thinking. Let's talk a little bit about censorship. So, censorship is, the suppression or prohibition of speech. And this is, in line with the First Amendment. So, our First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting freedom of exercise or abridging the freedom of speech, of press, or the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So the fact that we as a country have built free speech into our very creed, right, meant that, censorship was a big deal back then, and also is a big deal now. And the fact that we hold free speech so closely aligned with our values shows how much, we're able to exercise our freedom of be able to use language. So why do people censor? What is the point of censoring someone? It could be a form of protection. You don't want, for example, your child to watch TV and see someone cursing or to see a sexually provocative scene. You also want to promote values. Family values is a term tossed around a lot. And this is something to where, you as a society, you want to make sure that, the common values that you have don't contradict some of the media that you consume. You want to promote religion. So, if you're religious and you take the censorship very, you're religious and you take the mentioning of the Lord's name in vain, then that's something that you want to censor. And it also can promote some political views, right? And so, a lot of people are very against, for example, burning the American flag, but that is considered to be a form of free speech. So these are some ways in which movies before in the past they have tried to censor their own languages or their own speech. And so, I thought it was very funny because sometimes they'll replace it with the most strange things, like what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps. And as a warning, there's lots of cursing in this video. So, who has the power to censor? Who censors and who has the power to censor? Well, legislators, right? So the law, people say that yelling free speech only goes as far as, yelling fire in a crowded building. It only goes as far as like, does it infringe on people's safety? School boards, right? Clergy, religious officials, school officials, teachers, right? Parents, librarians, they can determine what books are considered to be too provocative or have some themes that are not in line with the values of a culture or school community. Theaters could choose to censor, bookstores, television studios. When you go, uh, well, we used to have these things in the past where you could go and buy like a CD. um, yeah, and sometimes they'll have like a censorship sticker. Or they'll have like a rated mature sticker. So I'm sure I think Netflix does this too. It has kind of a warning, but I don't know if Netflix actually censors. But a this is a very popular topic. And there's this the American Librarians Association has a Banned Books Week in which they highlight either the threats for censorship or the desire for censorship. So they just track the number of banned books, how many books that they read, and then count, why they were censored. So, for example, were they sexually explicit? Did they have offensive language? Were they unsuitable? Did they promote Satanism? Were they violent? Did they have a homosexual theme or, promoted a religious viewpoint? And so that was old statistics, 2005. So I decided to look at some new statistics. This is from 2020. These are top 5 books that were banned from schools, right? And they said why. So if you look through some of them, you'll notice that they all had LGBTQIA content, political views, they had sexual references, they contradicted with traditional family structure. It went against some of their feelings about young people, like what young people would read, pollute the morals of its readers. They are inappropriate. They discuss gender identity, or they indoctrinated young children, things like that. So very, very, very interesting as to, why they decided to ban these books. So, if you want your censorship to be more dramatic, you could go to a book burning, right? That would be considered to be free speech, right? And so there's this town, Penn Township in PA, that has very very famous for a book burning. So the person who organized it that year said, it's just something a little different. We're not trying to create a riot or anything. Cleanse your house from ungodly items and idols. It's time to deal with ungodly, demonic books, tapes, videos, statues, and any other thing that gives demons the opportunity to traffic into your life, right? So the things that they burned: Aladdin, Pinocchio, Bruce Springsteen, Harry Potter, Ernest Hemingway. So very, very dramatic here. But just remember, if some of you probably read in high school, I don't know, but Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, you don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. Just get them to stop reading. Okay, so this is could be said for what's happening currently. So your discussion questions this week is think of examples of different registers. So how would you say the same thing in 2 different ways, depending on the situation? What's bad language? What's dirty language? Who do you use bad language in front of? Are there different types of bad language for different people or groups? And also talk about censorship. Why is it good? Why is it bad? Very interesting to hear your thoughts, and I look forward to seeing you on the discussion board.